Hey everybody, this is the Marine. There's many different types of camp stoves like white gas or liquid fuel, canister fuel, solid fuel tabs, which we called in the Marine Corps heat tabs, alcohol stoves, and wood burning stoves. Now these are some of the most common stoves for backpacking, hiking, or any camping trip. There's no perfect stove. They all have their pros and cons in different situations. Some will perform well in some conditions, and some will not, and vice versa in those extreme conditions. Now, over the years, spending time in the great outdoors, I have used each and every one of these stoves in different seasons and different extreme conditions, and quite extensively. Now my favorite way for cooking or boiling water is on an open fire. I just love using this method. But the downside is you have to collect and process wood, which can take time. And when the weather conditions are wet or the ground is saturated, it could be really challenging. But one stove that I always have with me in the 4 seasons, and I highly recommend it. And if you're looking for a new piece of gear that's inexpensive and it's something you want to try this year, I recommend getting an alcohol stove. And my favorite alcohol stove is the Fancee Feest. Bam! One of the many things I like about the alcohol stove is its versatility. Besides the heat tab or chemical fuel, the alcohol stove is the lightest stove for boiling water, cooking food, or just making a hot drink to warm up your body. And they're very packable. They fit really nice or nestle into a cook kit. And this Fancee Feest works great in all 4 seasons. I've used this stove with the temperatures down to 30 below zero, which is negative 34 Celsius, and it performed beautifully. Another thing I love about the alcohol stove, it's so quiet. When I'm cooking my food with a canister stove or any mechanical stove, it'll be chugging. But with the alcohol stove, it's very quiet. And when I'm out in the wilderness, I love to hear the wind blowing or the birds chirping and not my stove chugging. And the fuel is very readily available in most hardware store or department store, and that's denatured alcohol, but I love to use the yellow bottle of heat, and I find that to be more efficient than any other fuel type. Both burn clean, no sooty residue, and you store the fuel in different bottles and sizes to get the exact amount of fuel to pack with you in your pack, so you don't have to carry extra fuel. For an example, I'll use 2 1-ounce bottles, which is 28 grams for an overnighter. And for those trips that are 3 days, 2 nights, I like to use a 6-ounce bottle, which is 170 grams. And for those trips that are going to be longer or the temperatures are going to be a lot colder, where I'm going to need more fuel for getting more hot drinks to keep me warm, I like to use the 8-ounce bottles, which is 226 grams. And again, you can take as many bottles to get the exact amount of fuel that you're going to need on your trip to take down that pack load. There's different ways to measure the alcohol for your stove. Zelph Stoveworks provides a measuring cup when you purchase a Fancee Feest. The easiest way is to mark 1 ounce or 28 gram lines on your fuel bottles. When the temperatures are extremely cold, when lighting the alcohol stove, it may take a little while to warm up the stove before you put the pot on. I like to share a little tip that works great in these conditions. So what you want to do is get a shirt or jacket with a chest pocket, and you get a 1-ounce bottle and you put it in a baggie, secure it, put it in your chest pocket, and this will keep the fuel nice and warm, so when you go to start in the extreme cold temperatures, it starts really quickly and you can cook your food and boil water efficiently. Now over the years I used many different types of alcohol stoves. And the one I found that works the best, and a lot of people agree, is this Fancee Feest. And this isn't a video on how to make one or DIY. And if you're interested in making one, I suggest you go to a channel called Midwest Backpacker. Jeremy last year did a video on how to make one of these, a DIY, and he did a really great job, so I suggest you check him out. Now this episode is about a specific stove and a company named Zelph Stoveworks, and they weren't the original creator of the Fancee Feest. His name was Jim Woods, and matter of fact, it was called Supercat. Zelph Stoves makes an excellent Supercat, now Fancee Feest, and they go for around 16 American dollars plus shipping and handling. And you guys, over the years, I've done a lot of DIY. I've made different things, of fly fishing rods, I tie flies, and I think either I'm lazy or these are just so inexpensive, and that's why I haven't made one yet. And for the dimensions, they're 2.5 inches or 64 millimeters in diameter, 2.125 inches or 54 millimeter tall, and they only weigh a ½ ounce, which is 24 grams. And the fuel capacity is 2.5 ounces, which is 74 millimeters. It has an aluminum body with fiberglass wicking material between the body and the integrated stainless steel pot support, which protrudes about 1 inch above the body, and the wicking material that pulls the fuel upwards for a complete burn of fuel. Now they say in perfect conditions with no wind, with a ½ ounce of fuel, which is 14 grams, you can boil 2 cups, which is 454 grams of water in 6 minutes, and that depends on the temperature of the water before you boil it. But I find that the average boil time for the Fancee Feest is right around 7.5 minutes, and that's with 3/4 ounce of fuel, which is 21 grams, to boil 2 cups of water, which is 450 grams. And you will have a little bit of burn time left over to play with. Now after you figure out what the burn time for your stove is, you can get the exact amount of fuel for the exact amount of water to boil. To light the stove, you first put the right amount of fuel. You can light it from the inside or wait a few seconds and light the wick. The alcohol burns so clean that the flame is not visible at first. Before you try to light it again, lower your hand slowly over the stove to feel any heat. Be careful not to burn yourself. And you can also put your pot on the stove and light the fiberglass wicking material. Now for most alcohol stoves, you gotta wait for the flames to bloom, and then you put the pot on top of it. Otherwise it'll smother it and put out the flame. But not with the Fancee Feest. These are very reliable, easy to use, just light and go. And also no moving parts to break down. I like to use a fold up piece of aluminum foil or tin foil shaped in a small square to put the stove on. It acts like a vapor barrier and will reflect the heat up. And it also protects the ground from the fuel that may have spilled over or from squirting the fuel from the bottle. Unless there's no wind, which is very rare, you should always use a windscreen. You can buy them, they're pretty cheap. Otherwise, they're really easy to make, like an aluminum turkey pan or a piece of tin or carbon felt. The sky is the limit, so be creative. Let alone will the windscreen block the wind from coming in, but it also traps the heat, which will help cook faster. And you can also get the Fancee Feest and order a simmer ring if you want to bake muffins or other things, and also for simmering foods. 1 ounce or 28 grams of fuel will allow you to simmer for about 20 minutes. If you're looking to lighten your pack load, looking for a new, inexpensive piece of gear, and you're skeptical of this Fancee Feest, I want you to listen to a message from my friend Runner.
Hey everybody, this is Runner, and I know everybody has their preferences in regards to what kind of stove they like to use out in wilderness camping. Years ago, I was always using different kinds of stove, mostly the propane, like a lot of people use, and with the canisters and things like that, which it worked fine. And I started to backpack with the Marine here, and he got me one of these Fancee Feest. In case you don't know what I mean by that, Fancee Feest is made out of a cat food can. So I was actually really reluctant to even start using it, because You know, I was pretty pleased with my other stove. It heated up quick and it worked well and lightweight. But I had to use it out of respect for the Marine. I had to give it a try. Tried it the first camp. Still wasn't sold on it. But I kept using it just because I didn't want to disrespect the Marine. Anyway, I am really actually sold on it now. I know you all have your own preference, but this is the one that I like for whatever it's worth. It works very well, lightweight, carry propane. I can show you the propane there if you want. A couple cans of that, it goes along with alcohol. I'm sorry. Carry the alcohol with the stove. Why don't you grab that alcohol? It's heat is what we use. So this is what we carry it in. And you can just pre-measure it. It takes just a very little amount of heat, alcohol, to heat up 12 ounces of water, or 16. I actually often use more, but this is always more than enough for like a few days, so depending on how much I gotta cook. So it works really great for me. For whatever it's worth, enjoy your camping trip and think about trying a Fancee Feest.
One thing about an alcohol stove that's rarely mentioned, some of them need a little bit of a break-in period. This Fancee Feest has this fiberglass material in there, and sometimes it's wrapped a little bit too tight and it's not efficient. So what you have to do is just fire it up over and over and over and be patient. In a short time, you'll be good to go. One other thing about an alcohol stove is that they make a great backup stove. I hope you found this video to be helpful and insightful, and if you have any questions or comments, please write them down below. I'd love to hear from you. This is the Marine. Thank you for watching, and God bless.